Hey everyone, today we're talking about the top 10 new superhero costumes. My favorite outfits from the 21st century in the world of superheroes. So without any further ado, aside from a polite reminder to like and subscribe, let's begin with number 10, Miles Morales. First up is a nominee I surprised myself with a little bit. Not so much with him showing up here. Miles is a big and popular character for good reason, and his excellent visual design has a lot to do with that. But he went from practically the first character I thought of for this video, and ranked at number 1 because of it, to being ranked all the way down here at number 10. The reason for that is quite simple. The comic book industry has changed a lot in the modern age. As opposed to the classic golden era of comic books, the market has increasingly diversified, with new indie series, while manga has grown into a steadily popular form of superhero storytelling in the last few decades. There's a lot of characters and costumes out there that proved very competitive for this list. And I had to make a lot of room and a lot of tough choices, even for my favorites. And don't get me wrong, Miles is one of my favorites. He first premiered in 2011, created by artist Sarah Pichelli, and she did a really phenomenal job with the design of this character. Miles' coloring in his Spider-Man outfit looks great, and the patterning does a lot of favors in making it feel fairly distinct from the Peter Parker version, to the extent it's difficult to believe anyone could get the two characters confused, but I can see an outsider to the world of Spider-Man doing so. It does keep enough of that Spider-Man costume identity to potentially be mixed up by a true outsider, but that being said, that also makes it look great in just about any context, like the Peter Parker costume. And what really helps it is just how effective Miles has been as a character consistently across film, video games, and comics. Just like the original Spider-Man costume, Miles' outfit has a certain evergreen quality to it, and it really feels like he's going to be around for decades to come because of it. It gets pushed lower on this list because, well, at the end of the day, it is just a Spider-Man outfit with some altered patterns and colors. Patterns and colors that make it very interesting and cool looking, but you can't deny it borrows heavily from the Steve Ditko original. While other costumes we're going to be talking about in this video, even other alternate costumes for Spider-Man, feel much more creative and groundbreaking, different in comparison. Miles is a fun character in his own right, which is what makes him appealing and successful, but his costume is only part of that. If anything, it is deliberately drawn to look like Spider-Man because so much of that narration is about this character finding his own identity outside of that, on his own path outside of Peter's shadow. That line of narrative is very important to why this character became a cultural force on his own, but also does go away to explain why the costume only goes so far on this particular top 10. Number 9. Gunslinger and other recent alternate spawns. Spawn certainly has been interesting these days. Though the series has been around for decades now, and even the idea of alternate forms of Spawn is something relatively old, things have been expanding for this particular franchise. The character's creator, Todd McFarlane, has these really cool ideas for a future of this character, a key component of which is alternate spawns. With plans for spin-offs, major talent, and names from across the comic book industry attached to join in some capacity or other for these new series, and all sorts of new characters to accompany that, it really seems like he wants to accelerate and grow the Spawn franchise into something it just hasn't been before. And McFarlane should never be underestimated in his ability to actually do these things. It helps that he's a strong artist who has grown and changed with the times, continuing to challenge himself. And as a result of all that, he has quite a few new costumes for Spawn, or alternate versions of the character. One that really stands out and particularly defines this nominee is the Spawn that lived in the Old West, the Gunslinger Spawn. That looks cool as hell. He and other versions of this character, all of which look great, will be featured in a new series called The Scorched. There's also a medieval Spawn, and very likely more on the way, as much of the things I'm talking about are just announcements and plans as of now. As these series start to roll out and further develop, we can only expect more developments and seeing more of these characters in action in fun ways. Personally, I can't wait to see what we're going to get because out of what we've had so far, it's all been very interesting and well done. Number 8.
0?
Something I found interesting for this list is, at this point, the Eastern world is full of contenders that very well could have made it to this top 10. The Dragon Ball franchise could have very easily dominated the top 10, but most of those rock-solid choices, the ones that would have been all over this list, actually come from the 20th century, outside of the range of costumes we're considering for this video. That prevented me from going to a few other choices I considered, but I surprised myself further when, delving through entire franchises of new existing characters, I had to pass right by some really big names. The big example that surprised me the most was My Hero Academia and Attack on Titan, two franchises with a lot of visual appeal in their character design, but one that largely exists outside of traditional superhero costumes. The characters of My Hero Academia really stand out in that regard as an illustration of this. They look great with distinct hairstyles and a really fun way of showcasing superpowers distinct to the animation of Japan. But generally, the design of these costumes runs pretty generic, often little more than a monochrome jumpsuit. So I ran through all these possible franchises from the shonen and beyond, finding too many that were either decades old or simply unable to stand up to the competition of something like Miles Morales' costume. It doesn't help, for example, that it feels like design has really gotten away from companies like Square. This video game company that was once the master of character design in the 1990s feel as though they pretty consistently deliver relatively generic options instead, or worse, suffer from over-design, where there's so much detail and nonsense thrown into a single costume, the senses get overwhelmed and nothing sticks to your memory. On the other hand, other video game companies from Japan are getting awfully close to the Persona 5 games or 2B from Nier Automata. And even then, this fiercely competitive list crowded out just about everyone I could think of, except for a couple of characters. And the first one up is Zero from the Code Geass series. Created for his 2006 premiere, Lelouch Lamperouge is the perfect kind of character we're looking for in this top 10. Well within our range of the last 20 years, unique and creatively distinct from other superhero designs, and specifically made to work with Lelouch's superpowers. This is a fantastic and memorable costume. Lelouch lives in an alternate universe defined by a global empire called Britannia, and his outfit, both as a civilian and his alter anti-hero identity Zero, showcase that well. Inspired by British royalty with a flair of modern superheroics, the group of artists who designed him, known as Cloud, did a fantastic job at giving this character flair, grace, and a feeling of power. The way he moves and carries himself is enhanced and exaggerated at every moment when he is in his Zero costume. He looks like the kind of character that could lead a revolution, the kind of figure that might inspire people to follow him, which is great because that's exactly what Zero is up to across the duration of the series. The anonymity behind the costume that also allows him to reveal parts of his face at any given moment work extremely well with his powers, but also serve an essential element of the story in a couple of counts. Lelouch is Britannian, so leading a revolution among a conquered Japanese people, even though he's one of the people that they're leading a revolution against. That and many other factors around Zero's ambiguous identity define so many aspects of the story in Code Geass right up to the end, making it not only a well-designed costume, but also a costume that is at its core a key element of the story. Code Geass simply wouldn't be the same without that Zero costume, and while it's far from the perfect series, and neither is Lelouch's character as written, I certainly think his design is near perfect. I had to debate with myself whether or not Zero can be truly identified as a superhero before reminding myself on the last top 10 we did, I included the Punisher. Lelouch certainly looks and acts the part, but as we learn over the course of the series, he is far from simple in terms of his morality. In the face of a conquered world where democracy is nothing but a dead dream, Zero, perhaps appropriately, manipulates the entire world, is responsible for the deaths of millions, and eventually forces peace from the world under threat of nuclear annihilation. He's complicated to say the least, the kind of character that feels like the prime sort of anti-hero that increasingly defines more modern, morally ambiguous writing across the entire world in the 20th century. And a key element of that really comes down to this well-designed, simple outfit. It works so well for this series and is so important to its identity. And, it's on Netflix if you want to check it out. Number 7. Uncanny X-Force. Next up is a solid example of a rare but not unheard of team uniform that I think is one of the coolest examples of said costumes in superhero history. The Uncanny X-Force, written by Rick Remender and with costumes by artist Jerome Opeña, features a Black Ops X-Men team back when the mutant race was on the verge of extinction. In such times, a team very willing to kill and push the boundaries of what the X-Men stood for in the name of mutant survival felt pretty appropriate. The series itself is dark, often borderline obsessive over death. For example, at the end of the first arc, when the mutant and breakout character of the team, Phantom X, murders a child. That child was genetically engineered and raised from birth to be a merciless dictator, but still. This is a series with extremely mature thoughts, a hefty amount of gore, and a lot of rock-solid moments from start to finish thanks to Remender's deft writing. But the thing that makes this series really stand out, even more than the writing, is the visual design of the X-Force themselves. A team like this, even the version of X-Force predating this one, generally goes for darker colors and darker outfits, usually outfits based entirely around black shading and inks. But Uncanny X-Force does the exact opposite, sticking much more consistently with white and gray shading. Not only do these costumes look unique and stand out because of that, but they contrast well with the black that is used, and the red lenses used by Angel, Wolverine, and Deadpool. This all comes together really nicely in outfits that not only stand out a little bit, not only look fantastic, but also have this sinister edge to them. I don't think most people are going to look at this team and think it's all about friendship and happiness, but rather on their face these characters look menacing and dangerous. No concerns about infiltration, camouflage, or stealth is necessary because these characters are too powerful and aggressive for something like that to matter. But this is the Uncanny X-Force. They are a Black Ops team and they do not want people to know about who they are or what they are up to. So if you see them, and you're gonna see them, they're gonna kill you. And even if a villain might stand a chance against a team as cool as this one, rarely is a villain going to look as good or as dangerous as the Uncanny X-Force. Number 6. One Punch Man. It feels right that One Punch Man, at least at its heart of a non-traditional series, has found its way into this video. Created originally as a webcomic by One, Saitama, the superhero that can defeat any character in a single punch, as the name might suggest, at first glance doesn't appear like much. A character like this always suffers from that Superman syndrome, where someone so powerful in theory should be impossible to defeat. And someone might look at this very simple, bare-bones design and think that it's too simple, and there's nothing to it. But the laid-back sense of humor within the series and baked into the character, along with the general sense of storytelling, all carefully crafted by One, is really something memorable. One that has truly caught on and grown its own audience. I think a big part of that is One's design for Saitama. Like how the character himself gained his own powers, his outfit feels homegrown. That of an amateur who found his own talent, identity, and powers on his own terms. I feel a lot of this is self-evident in the costume, which is great. Readers of the mangas or viewers of the anime can learn a lot of this character just by looking at it. The look and feel of this character has this timeless quality I feel will hold up for years to come, which is great because it's a fun series worth checking out. Number 5. Moon Knight Shalvey Redesign. Next up, in my opinion, is one of the best examples of a modern redesign of a superhero. From 2014 to 15, Marvel published 6 issues of Moon Knight designed to give the character a fresh look. While Moon Knight, initially considered a bit of a Batman ripoff, gradually grew into his own identity before this, I do see the value and reasons for why Marvel did this. There are a lot of cool aspects to Moon Knight that work, but at times he still felt like Batman, just with dissociative identity disorder kind of tacked on to him. And while there is a way to discuss and deal with Moon Knight and this disability, it's a bit of a tightrope walk doing so, and it hasn't always been done with the best of intentions. So Warren Ellis, this writer-turned-abusive monster, and more importantly, artist Declan Shalvey, set out to reinvigorate Moon Knight with this new energy. Thanks to Shalvey's imaginative use of artwork, bolstered by a strong sense of direction, we get not just one, but quite a few different takes on Moon Knight. These 6 issues are full of new costumes and ideas for the character, some that embrace Mark Spector's business and corporate ties, while others look towards his stuff with Khonshu and mysticism. Very rarely has Moon Knight ever looked better than in these books, even when Shalvey opts for a more traditional looking Moon Knight costume. These books do a good job at showing how Moon Knight can be a unique character of value, and can have these sort of adventures that feel pretty distinct from any superhero, Marvel or otherwise. This all comes down to Shalvey's solid artwork. For example, plenty of characters, including Moon Knight, have visited spiritual realms before, but rarely has it or Moon Knight quite looked as interesting when it is shown off in my favorite issue of this short but memorable run. And I strongly suspect Moon Knight, the Disney Plus show, will certainly borrow from visual cues in this series. If the people behind it know what they're doing, then they'll certainly recognize the value in wanting Moon Knight to look like his best. And that's this design right here. Number 4. Spider-Gwen, Ghost Spider. This one surprised me a bit in how competitive it turned out to be. I liked this costume and it felt right to include it in the top 10 right from the get-go. But when I really started dissecting what I liked about the costumes and what should be ranked where, Spider-Gwen really started to shine. Created in 2015 by Jason Latour and Robbie Rodriguez, this is a very memorable take on the old Spider-Man outfit, with a number of key features that makes it one of my all-time favorites. The biggest facet of this comes down to the coloring. The use of pink, white, and teal all make Gwen look distinct, while the lenses and web patterning, however limited their presence is, ensure she is still easily recognized as a Spider-Man of some sort. But unlike the Miles outfit, I don't see anyone mistaking this for regular Spider-Man. Gwen's look feels distinctly hers, a unique color palette among the entire world of superheroes that kind of gives her her own identity, not just a Gwen Stacy who became a Spider-Woman, but Spider-Gwen, who watched her first love, Peter Parker, tragically die. This simple inverse of what happened to Peter Parker in many other universes, when it was first announced, was treated with a lot of skepticism. But with a solid character design and some memorable moments throughout the comic book event Spider-Verse, pretty soon it became clear she would have a lasting legacy for years to come. Now, having starred in quite a few of her own comic book series and having been a huge part of the Spider-Verse movie, Spider-Gwen hardly feels controversial at all. Better yet, her series has shown that the writing around her can go a lot of places, and her character can do a lot of things that Peter Parker's character simply can't. Gwen isn't like Peter. She is less tech-oriented, is younger, less experienced, and more artistic in her personality. That is telegraphed well in her costume. The more colorful aspects might hint at that inner creativity that she has, but I think more important is stuff like the hoodie and my favorite detail, those teal slippers. These denote that the costume feels more cobbled together with stuff Gwen could find as opposed to Peter's much more polished look. Differences like that, in my opinion, do well to set this character apart. So with all this in mind, it was easy to rank her near the top. Number 3. Agent Venom. We enter our top 3 with one hell of a heavy hitter. Agent Venom, created in 2011, was the brainchild of a number of people. Obviously, Venom already existed as a costume, long before Agent Venom was introduced in a new comic by Dan Slott, Paulo Siqueira, and Ronan Sakei. But I feel that design was really refined by people like Tony Moore for Rick Remender's series that focuses on the character. It's here that we see how this version of Venom shines and why it exists so warmly in the hearts of so many fans, even after all the fun stuff Venom has been up to with Null these days. Agent Venom's design is sleek and memorable. The more military costume style of this iteration does a good job at reflecting Venom in this new role. Now in the body of Flash Thompson, this look makes sense and feels earned given Thompson's history as a military veteran, while his ability to cut loose and turn into a version of Venom we're more familiar with always makes for great storytelling. It's hard to dislike a berserker mode for a character, especially this character, and it's served well throughout the life of Agent Venom. It is a bit of a shame they couldn't last forever, but I do feel like they're still trying cool things with the symbiote elsewhere, so it's hard to be too upset about it all. Still, I can't understate how effective the Agent Venom costume works, and as much as I do enjoy all the stuff around the Null outfits, they really pale in comparison. The two forms of the Agent Venom costume not only are fun for the story, but also do a good job at illustrating the fact there are two minds in our protagonists. What they look like at any given moment tells us what's going on in their minds, and the struggle and eventual acceptance between the two is truly moving. The kind of stuff that leaves me thinking it's sort of Venom at his best. I highly recommend you check out the Agent Venom books if you haven't before, as you won't be disappointed, visually or from the story itself. And hopefully you'll fall in love with these costumes and characters as much as I did. Number 2. Invincible. Next up is a really fun costume that stands out in modern comic book history. Invincible, created in 2003 by Robert Kirkman as the writer and Cory Walker as the initial designer, has seen a recent surge in popularity thanks to its excellent series on Amazon Prime. That series serves as a good reminder for why this comic book run struck a chord with so many people when it first came out. Part of that really has to do with the overall design aesthetics created by Walker and later refined by Ryan Ottley. At first glance, much of this character, and even Invincible himself, kinda comes across as pretty standard looking superhero stuff. With clear analogs for things like Justice League and Teen Titans within this fictional world, it does appear to really just be another superhero franchise, on the surface. But for those in the know, Invincible is anything but standard, going places and pushing superhero content in a way Marvel and DC rarely ever dare to. Kirkman injected a healthy dose of realism into the superheroes and their battles, which really changes the dynamics of these fights in a big way. And best of all, the design of Invincible's costume reflects a lot of these themes. The bright colors and simple patterning tell us that Mark Grayson is young and optimistic, innocent to the very harsh world he's about to step into. It says a lot how brightly colored his costume is compared to the more cold and calculated look of his father. But I think it's the little detail of him wearing goggles so he doesn't get bugs or wind in his eyes that gets into the sort of realism I was talking about core to the series. Yes, these powers are fantastical and all sorts of moments kind of break that rule of realism. But I feel as though their world reacts to these insane, impossible superpowers much more like how our world would react compared to the worlds of Marvel and DC. The consequences of which are truly fascinating, and I think it is a big part of that idea, and even just the whole brand. So even though this costume looks simple, it's doing a lot for the franchise. Plus, it's cool looking and memorable as hell. Number 1. Guardians of the Galaxy, Annihilation Era. My top pick is a bit of an odd duck, but I feel it really represents a lot of key things I like when picking out costumes for a video like this. First up, it is truly original and completely redefined the Guardians of the Galaxy as they existed and were thought of before 2008. Because in that year, Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning worked together to completely transform the team from something that looked like this into something that far more resembles what people would recognize today. These new costumes would serve as the foundation for the Guardians as they were introduced in the MCU, but stand well on their own as solid costumes. In my opinion, the best example of a new superhero design in the 21st century. The group, established through the Annihilation Conquest storyline, would continue through such adventures like War of the Kings and the Thanos Imperative, both fun as hell. It outlined these new characters that defined the Guardians of this day, while the costumes were used to effectively leave the team identifiable and appealing with a new, unified look. The more consistent look across these characters works quite well for them. And like I said earlier, I do have a weakness for superhero team uniforms when they're done right. And these costumes accomplish that very well. These books are meant to introduce people to Marvel's more cosmic-oriented content, and I think they did a fantastic job. To date, they remain a great way to get into that kind of content. At a time when Marvel's content was steering to a really dark corner and starting to appeal to more mature readers, the more militaristic-looking Guardians, with their button-down outfits and cool coloring, reflected this darker mindset. The galaxy was facing new threats and seemed like a much scarier place than it was before, so a new, tougher protection was needed. These costumes stood out for all of those reasons, all while improving and refining the look of half a dozen characters with them. And thanks to this run, they ultimately would become household names. Marvel owes so much of this franchise to Abnett and Lanning, whose work really helped set the stage for more fun content in the future, in addition to what we've already enjoyed. And while the uniform look for the team never quite felt right for the MCU iterations of these characters, the costumes look amazing in a wide variety of contexts and still remain an element of design in new Guardian teams. I really look forward to them being used again in the future, as the costumes feel both effective and fun for making a unique faction in the world of Marvel. It might be worth noting that in a rare moment for a top 10 like this for our channel, DC failed to get a single entry in here. I think it boils down to a few reasons I've been thinking about while making this video. One, some of their better new costumes aren't all that new and are well past the age range I was using for this video. For another thing, it does seem like most of DC's new costumes are either riffs on existing costumes with minimal or boring differences, not very remarkable or memorable in their design, are cool looking but shown and used exactly once then completely forgotten about, or just completely useless. I've also had conversations with people who used to work from DC where it is pretty clear that at times the company has been very resistant to new costumes and characters because of marketing. The idea is that at some point within the last 20 years, DC got it in their head that changing the fundamental look of characters was a bad idea, because then they wouldn't look like the character on everyone's action figures, towels, and other merchandise. The insanity of that is not only does it deprive DC of the option of making new towels with these new costumes, it also means we're kind of falling behind Marvel in this regard, who kind of figured out this thing a long time ago, it seems like. And with the rise of other media like more robust indie comic book markets and manga, DC got crowded out of this particular top 10, and I kind of feel like they deserve it. Now, how much of that conversation I had is true, and whether or not it actually reflects DC's existing policy, remains to be seen, but it does explain a lot, like how a company could completely rebrand themselves 10 years ago and not have a single character receiving a meaningfully improved look to them. Marvel, on the other hand, seems to try and redesign its characters constantly, perhaps to a fault. But I feel it's a really solid sign of them giving the artists free rein to do this every time a new creative team comes along. The result is, at least in my opinion, they stumble on these successes all the time, even if there are plenty of failures along the way. But hey, maybe some of you disagree for some reason. If so, let me know why in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time here on Comic Island.